You said yes again today, and somewhere on the way home you could not explain to yourself why. You know the feeling, the conversation you walked into certain and walked out of apologizing, the money you spent on something you had not planned to buy, from someone who was very warm about it, the favor you resented before you had even finished agreeing to it. Nobody forced you. That is the part that sits badly. It felt like your own choice, and somehow it was not entirely yours. There is a woman I want you to keep in mind while you listen. Her name is Maya. She is 34. She kept a note on her phone, and she had titled it simply, "Sorry." It was a list of every apology she had made that year. By November, it had 41 entries, and she could no longer remember what half of them were for. Here is what you will have by the end of this. 19 tools. For each one, you will be able to name the exact move being used on you while it is still happening, and you will have one clean sentence that stops it. Not theory, and not suspicion of everyone you meet. 19 specific, usable defenses, and you can start with the first one tomorrow morning. And I want to be clear about what this is not. It is not about becoming cynical or treating everyone who is kind to you as a suspect. That is a miserable way to live, and it does not even work. It is about being able to tell the difference so that you can stay open and generous and warm without being taken. And at the very end, I will tell you what Maya found when she finally sat down and read her whole list. Chapter 1. The pull. There is a feeling that arrives about 2 seconds before you agree to something you will regret. Most people never learn to notice it. Once you can, almost everything else in this book becomes easy. Here is the mechanism. Before any manipulation works on you, something in your body moves first. A small pressure, a sense that you have to answer now, or that saying no would make you a bad person, or that this person is somehow above you. It is not a thought. It arrives before thought, and because it is not a thought, you do not argue with it. You simply act on it, and afterward, you build a reason for what you did. Think of it like a fishing line. You never see the hook go in. What you feel is the line going tight, a small, insistent pull in a direction you did not choose. Anglers will tell you the fish does not feel the hook. It feels the line. And the fish that survives is not the one that fights hardest. It is the one that notices the tension early before it is dragged. Why does this happen at all? Because your mind runs most of your day on shortcuts. It has to. You cannot weigh every request from first principles, so you carry a set of fast, automatic rules. If something is scarce, grab it. If someone gives you something, repay it. If a person with authority says so, comply. These rules kept your ancestors alive, and most of the time they still serve you well. A manipulator is simply someone who has learned to trip one of those rules on purpose, out of context, so that you act before your slower judgment arrives. They are not hacking your reason. They are getting there ahead of it. And here is the good news, which is bigger than it sounds. You do not have to memorize a list of tactics to protect yourself. There are dozens of tactics, and new ones every year. But they all produce the same handful of sensations in your body, which means you only ever have to notice one thing: the pull. Your body registers it reliably, every time, several seconds before your mind catches up. You have been feeling it your whole life. Nobody ever told you it was information. So here is your first tool, and it takes 4 seconds. When someone asks you for something, run a body check before you answer. You are looking for 3 signals. 1, a tightening in the chest or a drop in the stomach. 2, a sudden urge to speak quickly, to fill the silence, to explain yourself. 3, the feeling that saying no would make you rude, cold, or difficult. If you find even one of them, you are not evaluating a request anymore, you are being pulled. And then you use the single most useful sentence in this entire book. You say calmly, "I need to think about it." You do not justify it. You do not soften it. 6 words, and the pull loses its grip. Because every tactic in this book depends on you answering while the line is still tight. Try it once on something small. The next time a shop assistant asks if you want the extended warranty, notice the little squeeze of pressure and say you will think about it. Feel how easily the moment survives. That is the muscle. Everything else is detail. Trust the signal even when you cannot justify it. People dismiss the pull constantly because they cannot point to anything the other person actually did wrong, and reacting anyway feels like paranoia. It is not. Your body is responding to a pattern it has seen thousands of times, faster than you can put into words. You are not required to build a case before you are allowed to slow down. Feeling the tug is enough on its own, and a pause costs you nothing, even on the occasions when you turn out to be wrong. Here is what it sounds like in an ordinary week. The call from a number you do not recognize that opens with, "Do not hang up." The friend who begins with, "I need a favor." And you can absolutely say no, and you already know you are not going to say no. The assistant at the till asking whether you want the protection plan, while your card is in your hand and there are people waiting behind you. In every one of those, notice that the pressure arrives before any information does. You have not been told the price, the terms, or the details. You are already leaning. And notice the second half of the mechanism, because it is the part that hides the whole thing from you afterward. Once you have acted on the pull, your mind writes a reason for what you did, and it writes a good one. You were not rushed into the warranty. You decided it was sensible. You did not cave. You were being a good friend. That reason feels exactly like a thought you had. It arrived afterward, to explain a decision your body had already made. You will feel the line go tight long before you ever see the hook. And of all the ways someone can make that line go tight, there is one they reach for first because it is the fastest and because it works on almost everyone. In the next chapter, the clock. Chapter 2, the clock. Only 2 left at this price. Sale ends at midnight. I have another buyer coming this afternoon. Notice that none of those sentences is an argument. Each one simply starts a clock. The mechanism is straightforward. Urgency does not make an offer better. It makes the pause shorter. And the pause is the only place where your judgment lives, so anyone who shortens it has already won most of the negotiation before you have understood what is being sold. Picture a clock that someone else winds and sets down in front of you. You did not choose the hour. You did not agree to the deadline. But the moment you can hear it ticking, you start moving to its rhythm, and the faster it ticks, the less of you is in the room. That is the whole trick. It is not their argument you are responding to. It is their clock. There is a study I like here because it is so simple. 3 researchers gave people cookies from a jar and asked them how desirable the cookies were. Some jars held 10 cookies, some held only 2. Same cookies, same recipe, but the ones from the nearly empty jar were rated as more desirable and more valuable. And when a jar went from full to almost empty in front of someone, the cookies became more desirable still. Nothing had changed except how much was left. Your mind carries an old rule that says if a thing is running out, it must be worth having, and beneath that sits an even older one. Losing something hurts about twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. So when someone starts a clock, they are not selling you the thing. They are selling you the fear of losing it. The good news is that this is the easiest string in the book to cut, because manufactured urgency has one weakness it cannot hide. It cannot survive a night. Real opportunities almost always can. A good apartment, a fair price, an honest offer, a decent job, none of them evaporate because you slept on them, which means you do not have to become a shrewder negotiator, you only have to become slower. So here is the tool, and it is one rule with one sentence. The rule is the 24-hour test. Any offer that cannot survive you thinking about it overnight was never an offer. It was a trap with a clock attached. The sentence is this: I do not make decisions on a deadline that someone else set. Say it plainly, without apology, and watch what happens next, because their reaction will tell you everything. An honest seller says, of course, take your time, the other kind gets tense, or suddenly finds one more reason it must be today. That tension is your answer. Make it concrete. The car dealer who says the manager approved this price for today only. You say you will think about it overnight. The recruiter who needs your decision by Friday for no reason either of you can name. You ask what happens on Monday. The website with a countdown timer in the corner, reload the page and watch it politely start again. Almost every clock in your life was wound by someone who benefits from your speed, And the clock is not only used to sell you things, it turns up in arguments where someone demands you settle something right now at 11 at night when you are tired and cannot think clearly. It turns up in ultimatums that require an answer today about a life that will still be there next week. Whenever the pressure is on the timing rather than on the substance, that is your tell, because a good case does not need a deadline in order to win. You will meet the clock this week, probably more than once, the booking page telling you 2 seats remain at this fair, which will still be there in an hour with a slightly different number. The dealer whose manager approved this figure for today only. The recruiter who needs an answer by Friday and cannot tell you what changes on Monday. The person who demands you decide right now, in the middle of an argument, about something that will still be true tomorrow morning. There is a probe that works on all of them and costs you nothing. You ask simply, what happens if I decide tomorrow? Then you listen, not to the answer, but to the temperature of it. Someone honest tells you exactly what happens, and it is usually not much. Someone working you gets warm, or vague, or slightly offended, and begins explaining why you are being difficult. That change in tone is more reliable than any argument either of you could make. One last version of the clock deserves a mention, because it is the one that catches careful people. Sometimes nobody starts it but you. You decide the matter should be settled by the end of the month. You decide you cannot keep the other person waiting any longer. You decide that having thought about it for 3 days is already too long, and that a reasonable adult would have made up their mind by now. Then you choose fast, in order to relieve a pressure that nobody actually applied. Manufactured urgency does not always arrive from outside. Sometimes it is a habit you carry in with you, and it deserves exactly the same test as the salesman's. Ask what genuinely happens if you decide tomorrow, and then answer the question honestly, out loud if you have to. Most of the time, the honest answer is nothing. Nothing happens. The world simply waits, which is what it was always going to do. An offer that cannot survive one night was never an offer, but not every pull feels like pressure. The next one arrives as kindness, and it is far harder to refuse because it starts with somebody giving you something. Chapter 3, The Gift. Someone does something nice for you that you did not ask for. A small favor, a free sample, a round of drinks, and a few minutes later, they want something. You already know you are going to say yes, and you have not worked out why. The mechanism is one of the oldest rules in human life. When somebody gives you something, you owe them. That rule is not a weakness. It is the reason our species survived. If I share my food today and you feel nothing about it, I starve when it is my turn to be hungry. So evolution built a genuine discomfort around an unpaid favor, an itch we resolve by giving back. The trouble is that the rule does not check 2 things. It does not check whether you asked for the gift, and it does not check whether what is being asked in return is anything like a fair trade. So picture the gift with an invoice folded up inside it. You are handed the box. The box is real and often quite nice, but there is a piece of paper in the bottom with a number on it, and you did not agree to that number, and you did not sign anything. You just opened the box. Researchers tested this in a restaurant, and the numbers are almost funny. A waiter brings the bill with a single mint, and tips go up a little. 2 mints, and tips go up more. But the biggest jump came when the server set the bill down, started to walk away, then turned back and said, "You know what, for you, let me leave a couple of these." Same candy. What changed was that it felt personal, unexpected, and given to you specifically. Tips rose by around 1/5. For 2 mints. And now the good news, and this is the part almost nobody realizes they are allowed to do. The gift and the request are 2 separate events. Your mind glues them together because the reciprocity rule is fast and sloppy, but nothing in the world actually requires you to pay for something you never ordered. You can keep the mint, you can accept the favor, feel real warmth about it, and still say no to what comes next. Those are not contradictory. They only feel contradictory in the 2 seconds before you think. Here is the tool. When a gift and a request arrive close together, split them out loud if you need to. First, receive the gift properly. Thank you, that was kind of you. Full stop and mean it. Then judge the request on its own, as if it had come from a stranger who had given you nothing. Ask yourself one question. If they had asked me this with empty hands, would I say yes? If the answer is no, then the answer is no, and the gift changes nothing. The sentence is simple. Thank you, genuinely. And no, that does not work for me. Watch for the version that hides best. In a negotiation, someone opens absurdly high, then generously comes down. That descent feels like a gift, and your reflex is to give ground back. It is not a gift. The ground they surrendered was ground they never wanted. And in daily life, watch the person who helps you unprompted, repeatedly, and always seems to need something a week later. Real generosity does not keep a ledger. If you can feel the ledger, it is not a gift. There is one more version worth naming because it hides inside negotiations. Someone opens with a request far larger than they ever expected to get. You refuse. Then they retreat to something smaller and more reasonable, and that retreat feels like a concession, so your reflex is to give ground back. It was not a concession. The smaller request was the target from the very beginning, and the enormous one existed only so that the real ask would arrive feeling like a favor being done for you. Watch for it at 3 different scales. The small one, at the supermarket, where the free sample sits between you and the shelf, and the person handing it out is paid precisely to create the discomfort you feel walking away without buying. The middle one, where a colleague helps you unprompted twice in a month and then needs something on a Friday afternoon. And the large one, where someone hosts you or covers something expensive. And the request that arrives 3 weeks later is worth far more than the gesture ever was. The tell in all 3 is timing again. A real gift has no follow-up attached to it. Nobody who genuinely gave you something needs you to remember it a fortnight later. So if a past kindness gets mentioned, even lightly, even warmly, at the exact moment a request is being made, then it was never a kindness. It was a deposit, and this is the withdrawal. A gift you did not ask for is not a debt you have to pay, but some strings are not tied to a gift at all. Some are tied to something you already said, and that one is much harder to see because it uses your own words as the rope. Chapter 4, the small yes, and nobody talks you into something big all at once. They talk you into something tiny, and then let your own consistency do the rest of the work for them. The mechanism has a name. Once you agree to a small thing, your picture of yourself shifts slightly to match it, and after that, the bigger request no longer feels like an escalation. It feels like being consistent with who you apparently are. Refusing would mean contradicting yourself, and people will do a great deal to avoid that. Think of a ladder. Nobody asks you to climb to the 10th rung. They ask you to put 1 foot on the first, which costs nothing and holds no risk. But once you are standing on a ladder, every following rung is only slightly higher than the one you are already on, and no single step ever feels like the moment to stop. You do not notice the height until you look down. There is a study from the 1960s that shows this beautifully. Researchers asked homeowners to put an enormous, ugly billboard reading drive carefully on their front lawn. Almost everyone refused. About 17 in 100 agreed. But one group had been visited 2 weeks earlier and asked for something tiny, to display a small sign in their window supporting safe driving. Nearly all of them had said yes to that. And when the huge billboard was proposed to those same people, more than 3/4 accepted. Nothing about the billboard had changed. What changed was that they now thought of themselves as the kind of person who supports safe driving, and the ladder did the rest. Here is where a woman named Maya comes in. She kept a note on her phone titled "Sorry," a list of every apology she had made that year, and by November it had 41 entries. When she finally looked at it, what struck her was not the big things, it was how small the first apology in each chain always was. One tiny yes, one small concession, and then a sequence that ran downhill from there. Now the good news, you are allowed to be inconsistent. That sentence sounds trivial, and it is not. Consistency is a virtue between people, when it means keeping the promises that matter. It is not a virtue with yourself when it means being unable to change your mind because a version of you from 3 weeks ago clicked a button. The moment you give yourself permission to step off a ladder at any rung, the entire tactic stops working because it has nothing left to hold you with. The tool is one question, asked about the current request only. Forget everything you have already agreed to. Forget the effort, the time, the small yes from before. Ask this. If this were the very first thing this person had ever asked me, would I say yes? That is the only relevant question, because the past cannot be unspent, and it does not get a vote. And when you need it, use the sentence out loud. I know I said yes before, I have thought about it, and I am saying no now. It will feel for about a second like a small betrayal. It is not. It is the sound of a rope going slack. Look for the ladder in the free trial that becomes a subscription, in the job that asked for one weekend and now owns your evenings, in the relationship where every demand is only slightly larger than the last one you accepted. In all of them, the trap is not the current request. It is the idea that your previous yes obligates you. There is a colder version of this that car dealers have used for decades. You agree to an excellent price. You picture yourself driving it. You tell your family. You begin the paperwork. Then the manager cannot approve that number after all, and the real price is higher. By rights, you should walk out. Most people do not because they have already committed in every way except the money. The good price bought the commitment, and the commitment quietly survives the good price disappearing. Look for the first rung because it is always small and always harmless. The free trial that needs a card. The 1 weekend of overtime. Just this once, as a favor. The modest first investment that goes well, followed by calls to add more. The new relationship where the first request you did not want to agree to seemed far too minor to argue about. And add one habit that makes the whole ladder visible. Whenever you notice you are being asked for something slightly larger than last time, count it out loud to yourself. This is the 4th time. This is the 7th. Counting is remarkably powerful, because a ladder only works while each rung is being compared to the one just below it. The moment you compare the rung you are standing on to the ground, the height becomes obvious. And obvious heights are easy to climb down from. Your old yes is not a contract. It is just an old yes. Some people do not need your past words at all, though. Some simply put on the right clothes and give you an instruction, and most of us obey without ever checking who they are. Chapter 5. The Costume. A stranger in a uniform tells you to move, and you move. A voice on the phone says it is calling from your bank, and your stomach drops before you have asked a single question. That reflex is not stupidity. It is one of the oldest survival rules you own, and it is being rented out by people who never earned it. The mechanism is simple. In any group, questioning the person in charge used to be dangerous, so we evolved to defer quickly and automatically to signs of authority. And note the word signs. Your mind does not check credentials, it checks symbols, a title, a uniform, a confident tone, a logo on an email. So picture authority as a costume hanging on a hook. Anyone can take it down and put it on. The costume does not confer competence or honesty or the right to instruct you. It simply triggers a reflex in whoever is looking at it. And costumes, unlike expertise, can be bought in an afternoon. 2 studies make this uncomfortably clear. In one, a researcher had people on the street ask passers-by to do odd little things, pick up a bag, give a stranger a coin for a parking meter. When the person asking wore ordinary clothes, most people ignored them. When the same person wore a security guard's uniform, obedience jumped sharply, and people complied even after the guard had walked away and could not possibly enforce anything. In the second, far more sobering, a caller phoned hospital wards, said he was a doctor, gave a name nobody recognized, and instructed nurses to give a patient double the maximum dose of a drug. It broke several rules at once. 21 of the 22 nurses began to comply and had to be stopped. These were trained professionals. The costume simply arrived faster than the training. The good news is that a costume has one permanent weakness. It cannot survive an independent check. Real authority is completely comfortable being verified because verification confirms it. Counterfeit authority has to stop you from checking, and it only has one way to do that, which is pressure, urgency, irritation, or a small insult about your trust, which means you do not need to become an expert at spotting fakes. You only need to notice who gets tense when you slow down. Here is the tool, and it is a single habit. When anyone with authority makes a demand, especially an urgent one, you verify through a channel they do not control. Not the number they gave you, not the link in their message. You hang up and call the number printed on your own card. You look up the office yourself and phone it. You say the sentence out loud without apology. I am going to verify this and call you back. Then you watch. The real bank thanks you. The real official waits. The costume argues or hurries you or gets offended. And that reaction is the entire test. Make it concrete. The call about fraud on your account, which wants you to confirm details right now. Hang up. Call the bank yourself. The email from your own company asking for an urgent transfer, signed by a name you know. Phone the person directly. The tradesman who says the inspection is required today. Check with the office that supposedly sent him. In every case, the check costs you 2 minutes, and 2 minutes is exactly what a counterfeit cannot afford to give you. It helps to know what the costume is actually made of. Titles, clothes, and trappings. A title does most of the work before any evidence is offered, because we hand it the credibility we should be reserving for the argument itself. Clothes do the next part, which is why a high-visibility vest will walk a stranger into almost any building unchallenged. And the trappings finish it off, the office, the jargon, the confident handshake. None of it is competence. All of it is available to anyone willing to buy the outfit. 3 places you will meet the costume this month. The message about fraud on your account, needing you to confirm details immediately, built so that the frightening sentence always arrives before any verifiable one. The email from inside your own company, apparently from someone senior, asking for an urgent payment or document, landing late on a Friday when nobody wants to bother the boss. And the person at your door with a lanyard and a clipboard who needs access today, for reasons involving a word like compliance or inspection. The same 2 minutes solves all 3, and the sentence is always available to you. I'm going to check this and come back to you. Then you look the number up yourself. Notice that you never have to accuse anyone of anything, which is what stops most people from checking at all. You are not calling them a liar. You are doing what any careful person does, and the honest ones will have forgotten it by tomorrow. Authority that cannot survive a phone call was never authority. And when a costume is not enough, there is a bigger tool available. Not one person's authority, but everybody's. Or at least, everybody they can arrange for you to see. Chapter 6. The Borrowed Crowd. When you do not know what to do, you look at what everyone else is doing. That instinct is usually wise. It is also the easiest thing in the world to fake. The mechanism is called social proof. Under uncertainty, you outsource your judgment to the group, because the group is usually right and because being the odd one out was historically a good way to end up alone, so you take the crowd as evidence. And a manipulator does not have to change your mind about anything. They only have to arrange the crowd you happen to see. Picture a queue outside a nightclub. It is long and it is moving slowly, and it tells you this place must be worth waiting for. What you cannot see is that 1/3 of the people in that line were paid to stand there, and the room behind the door is half empty. The queue is not information. The queue is the advertisement. Researchers proved how well this works in the least glamorous setting imaginable, which is hotel towels. For years, the signs asking guests to reuse their towels made an environmental appeal, and they worked a little. Then someone tried a different message. Most guests in this hotel reuse their towels. That did better. And when it became most guests who stayed in this room reuse their towels, better again. Nothing changed about the towels. What changed was how close the crowd felt to you. And that is the detail worth remembering, because it is why manipulators do not just fake a crowd, they fake your crowd, the parent just like you, the person in your industry, the neighbor from your town. There is a darker version too. In one experiment, people sat in a room that slowly filled with smoke. Alone, most got up quickly to report it. But when they sat with others who calmly did nothing, most also did nothing. They looked at the untroubled faces around them and concluded that if nobody else was worried, it must be fine. They sat in the smoke, everyone reading everyone, and everyone's stillness becoming false evidence that there was no fire. The good news is that a fake crowd is fragile in a very specific way. It cannot survive being made specific. Real proof has names, sources, and people you can actually check. Manufactured proof only works as a blur. Everyone, most people, thousands of customers. The moment you ask who, precisely, the blur has to resolve into something, and usually there is nothing there. So here is the tool. Whenever a decision is being pushed by everyone, stop and ask 3 short questions. Who exactly are they? Are they actually like me? And do they have my interests or the seller's? A genuine consensus survives all 3 easily. A rented one falls apart at the first, and then hold on to the second half of the tool, which matters just as much. Even a real crowd can be wrong. Everyone is doing it has never once been a reason for you to do it. It is only ever a reason to look more carefully. Make it practical. Before you trust a 5-star average, look at whether the reviews sound like people or like slogans. Before you take the busy restaurant as proof, notice whether the queue is moving. And when someone tells you that everyone in your position chooses the premium option, ask them to name 2. It is worth being concrete about how cheaply a crowd can now be manufactured. Reviews are bought in bulk. Follow accounts are purchased in blocks. Comment sections are seeded before a product exists. A number on a screen used to be expensive to fake, and it is now close to free, which means the evidence your instinct treats as strongest has become the evidence that costs the least to counterfeit. Your instinct has not caught up. It was built for crowds you could see with your own eyes in a village, where a queue meant something, because the people standing in it were people you knew. Nothing about it was designed for a figure, under a video that somebody simply typed. So when you find yourself moved by a number, a rating, a count, a percentage, treat the feeling as real and the number as unverified. The feeling is old wiring doing its job. The number is only a claim, and claims are exactly the sort of thing you are allowed to ask for evidence about. 3 places to practice it. When you are about to trust a 5-star average, read the actual reviews and notice whether they sound like people or like slogans. Real reviews mention specific, boring, slightly irrelevant details. Fakes almost never do. When you see a queue, check whether it is moving, because a line that does not move is not demand, it is decoration. And when someone tells you that everyone in your position takes the larger package, ask them to name 2 and watch what happens to the conversation. The other half of this is quieter and matters more across a lifetime. Get comfortable being the one person in the room who is not going along, not loudly, and not as a performance. Just the small, ordinary willingness to say, "I think I will pass," while everyone around you is nodding. That capacity is rarer than it sounds, and almost everything in this book eventually rests on it. A crowd you are shown is not a crowd you can trust. There is one more way to lower a person's guard, and it is gentler than all of these and far more effective. It works by making you feel wonderful. Chapter 7, The Mirror. You would like to think you can see through flattery, that when someone lays it on thick, right before they ask you for something, you notice and stay unmoved. Here is the uncomfortable finding. Knowing a compliment is fake does not protect you from it. The mechanism is that praise does not work on your judgment. It works on your liking. And liking is not a conclusion you reach, it is a temperature you sit in. Once someone has raised it, every request that follows meets less resistance, because you scrutinize people you like far less carefully than people you do not. So think of the manipulator as a mirror that flatters, not a lie exactly. A reflection with the angle tilted slightly, so you come out looking a little taller, a little sharper, a little more interesting than usual. Nobody walks away from a mirror like that. And while you are admiring the reflection, you are not watching the hands. 2 researchers tested exactly this. They showed people flattery that was obviously strategic, from a shop, with a clear motive to sell. Consciously, people were not fooled at all. Asked directly, they called it insincere and dismissed it. But when the researchers measured the automatic, gut-level attitude underneath, the flattery had landed cleanly and created real warmth toward the flatterer. The thinking mind said, "Nice try." The faster mind kept the glow. And it is the glow that drives behavior. Psychologists have a broader name for the family of moves here, ingratiation, and the first person to map it, Edward Jones, listed its forms decades ago. Praise, agreeing with everything you say, small favors, appearing to be similar to you, all aimed at one reflex, which is that we like people who seem to like us. Now remember Maya. She is the woman I mentioned at the start, 34 years old, who kept a note on her phone titled "Sorry," listing every apology she made that year, and who had 41 entries by November. Here is the detail that matters in this chapter. When she looked at where those apologies clustered, the heaviest stretch came from the months when she felt most appreciated, not the months when she was criticized, the months when someone told her, often and warmly, how understanding she was, how easy to talk to, how unlike everyone else. She had been praised into agreeing with things, and because it felt like being valued, she had no idea it was happening. The good news is that flattery has a tell, and it is not the compliment, it is the timing. Praise that arrives attached to nothing, from someone who wants nothing, on an ordinary day is simply kindness, and you should take it and enjoy it. Praise that arrives immediately before a request, or from someone who needs something from you, is a tool. The closer those two things land to each other, the more certain you can be. You do not have to become suspicious of every kind word. You only have to notice how near it sits to an ask. Here is the tool. When a compliment and a request appear in the same conversation, separate them and treat them as two different events. Bank the compliment if it is real. Then judge the request exactly as you would if a stranger who had just insulted you had made it. Ask the same question you used with the gift. If they had said nothing kind at all, would this still be a yes? And when you need the sentence, it is easy and warm. That is a kind thing to say, thank you. And no, I am not going to do that. Notice that the warmth costs you nothing. You are not being cold. You are simply keeping the good feeling and the decision in different rooms. Be most alert to one specific flavor. Praise aimed at your judgment, your intelligence, or your ability to see through people. That one is not just flattery. It is the setup for the last chapter of this book, and it is the most effective compliment ever invented. You will notice it most in three shapes. The salesperson who admires your taste, your eye, your judgment, exactly one sentence before recommending the expensive option. The person who opens with, "You are clearly a smart person, so you will understand why," which is a compliment used as a lever, because disagreeing now means being the kind of person who does not understand. And the new acquaintance who agrees with absolutely everything you say on every subject, which is not compatibility. It is a mirror being held very still. One simple habit protects you from all three. When someone compliments you, wait for the next thing they say, just wait. If the compliment was real, nothing follows it, and you can take it fully and enjoy it. If a request arrives within the minute, you have learned something about the compliment, and you have learned it early enough to matter. A compliment that arrives just before a request is not a compliment. It is a tool. The next move is cruder, and it works on the body rather than the ego. It scares you first, and then it rescues you. Chapter 8, The Whiplash. And there is a specific moment when almost anyone will agree to almost anything. It is not when they are frightened, it is the moment just after the fear goes away. The mechanism is a kind of emotional whiplash. Fear floods your body and mobilizes everything. Then the threat vanishes, and the flood drains out all at once. What is left is not calm judgment. It is a dazed, grateful, wide-open state, and in that window your defenses are simply not at their posts. Picture standing in shallow surf. A wave knocks you off your feet, and for a second there is only panic and salt. Then it passes, and you are standing again, laughing with relief. And it is precisely then, while you are unsteady and grinning, that the undertow takes your legs. It is never the wave that pulls people out. It is the water going back. Two Polish researchers documented this in one of my favorite pieces of field research. They found people crossing the road against the light, and as they crossed, blew a police whistle. Picture the jolt, the certainty that you have been caught, and then a second later, the realization that the whistle was not for you at all. Just relief. At that exact moment, a researcher approached and asked them to fill out a long questionnaire. The people who had just been through the scare agreed at dramatically higher rates than people who had not. They repeated it in other forms, including a note under a windscreen wiper that looks exactly like a parking ticket and turns out to be an advertisement. The result held every time. This is the hidden engine of good cop, bad cop, which is one of the oldest interrogation methods there is. One person terrifies you, the other rescues you, and you tell the rescuer things you would never have volunteered to the threat. It is also, word for word, the structure of the modern scam call. First, the spike. There is a warrant for your arrest. We have detected fraud on your account. Your grandson has been in an accident. Then, right on cue, the lifeline, but I can fix this for you if you just confirm a few details. The terror opens the door. The relief walks through it carrying a form for you to sign. The good news is that this string is loud. Unlike flattery, which is subtle, whiplash announces itself because you can feel the two states in your own chest within a single minute. Fear, then flood of relief. That contrast is not something you have to detect carefully. It is the most obvious sensation in this entire book. Once you know, it means something. So here is the tool, and it is a rule about timing rather than content. Never decide anything in the 10 seconds after a fear lifts. That is the whole rule. When a terrifying call suddenly turns reassuring, when panic gives way to a rescuer, when someone threatens and then softens, that swing is your signal to stop rather than to comply. Hang up. Step outside. Let the chemistry drain out of you, which takes a few minutes and not more. Then from calm, verify everything through a channel the other person does not control. Call the bank yourself. Phone the grandchild directly. Look up the office and ring it. The sentence, if you need one, is short. I will deal with this, but not right now. Say it and go. Nothing that is genuinely on your side requires your answer in the flood of relief. Your family can wait 10 minutes. Only the person working you cannot. It helps to know why relief in particular leaves you so open. Fear narrows you and mobilizes everything you have. When the threat then vanishes, all of that mobilization has nowhere to go, and what remains is a body that is flooded, slightly unsteady, and enormously grateful. That state feels like safety, which is exactly the problem, because safety is when you stop checking. You are not thinking more clearly after the scare. You are thinking less clearly and feeling much better about it. You will hear the structure most clearly on a scam call, and once you have heard it, you cannot unhear it. Listen for the two halves. First, there is a warrant, your account is compromised, your grandson has been arrested. Then, within about 30 seconds, but I can help you sort this out, if you stay on the line with me. The entire script is that hinge, and everything before it exists only to make the hinge work. It also happens in rooms you cannot hang up on. The manager who opens a meeting talking about restructuring and ends it by saying your position is safe, then asks, while you are still flooded with relief, whether you could take on the extra region. The partner who lets you believe something terrible for 10 minutes and is loving again right before asking for the thing they wanted. In both cases, notice where the request sits. It always arrives on the far side of the relief, never before it. The people who care about you can wait 10 minutes, only the ones working you cannot. The next one does not rush you or frighten you. It works slowly over months, and what it takes from you is stranger than money. It takes your confidence in what you remember. Chapter 9, the edited memory. You remember the conversation clearly. They tell you calmly and with total confidence that it never happened. And the strange thing is not that they said it. The strange thing is that after the 4th or 5th time you begin to wonder. The mechanism rests on a fact about your mind that most people do not know. Your memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction, rebuilt slightly differently every time you recall it, and it can be edited from outside by someone confident enough to insist. So picture a photograph that someone keeps taking off the wall and retouching. Just a little each time. A face softened here, a detail moved there, and always handed back to you as if nothing had changed. Look at it after a year and you cannot say what has been altered. You only know it no longer quite matches what you remember standing there. Elizabeth Loftus spent a career proving this. In one study, she showed people a film of a car accident and asked how fast the cars were going when they hit each other. For some, she changed one word and asked how fast they were going when they smashed into each other. That single word made people remember higher speeds, and a week later made them far more likely to remember broken glass at the scene. There had been no broken glass. In later work, researchers showed people a fake advertisement featuring a cartoon rabbit at a theme park, and a striking number then remembered meeting him there as children, shaking his hand. It could never have happened. That character belongs to a different studio entirely. The memory felt completely real, and it was built out of a single suggestion. The word for the tactic comes from an old play, later a film, in which a husband slowly convinces his wife she is losing her mind. One of his tricks is to dim the gas lamps in the house each evening, while insisting calmly that nothing has changed. She sees them dim. He tells her she does not, night after night, until her trust in her own eyes is gone. That was always the point. Not one enormous lie. The patient, confident denial of something you can plainly see. The good news is genuinely reassuring, and it is this. The vulnerability is not in you, it is in the storage. Your memory is editable, but the world is not. A message with a date on it cannot be talked out of existence. A note you wrote on Tuesday does not change on Thursday because someone insists, and another person who was in the room is a witness your memory cannot overwrite, which means you do not need a better memory. You need a copy kept somewhere the other person cannot reach. So here is the tool, and it has two halves. The first is to write things down plainly and without drama. If you are dealing with someone who rewrites events, keep a short log. The date, one line about what was said, nothing more. Save the messages. Not to win an argument, because you will rarely win that one and you do not need to. You keep it for yourself, so that when the confident voice tells you it never happened, you have somewhere solid to stand. The second half matters just as much. Tell one person you trust early. The single most protective sentence against this tactic is another human being saying, "No, I was there too, and that did happen." That is why this move almost always travels with the one in Chapter 12, which is isolation. It needs you alone with it. And when you are in it, do not argue harder. You do not have to win the debate about reality. You only have to decline to hand it over. The sentence is calm, and it ends the exchange. We remember it differently. I trust my record. In practice, the record is far smaller than people imagine. One line, one date, in the notes on your phone, taking about 10 seconds. Tuesday, he said he never agreed to the payment. Sunday, she said the conversation about the holiday never happened. You are not building a case and you are not preparing for a trial. You are simply refusing to keep your only copy in the one place that can be edited from outside. And be careful with one instinct, because nearly everyone gets it wrong. Do not use the record to win the argument in the moment. Producing screenshots halfway through a disagreement almost never ends the way you hope. It escalates, and it teaches the other person to be more careful rather than more honest. The record is for you, so that 6 months from now you can look at 14 short lines with dates beside them and see a shape you could never have seen from inside any single Tuesday. You do not need a better memory. You need a copy they cannot reach. The next one is what a certain kind of person does the moment you finally confront them, and it is so disorienting that most people end up apologizing for having spoken at all. Chapter 10, the reversal. You finally raise the thing they did. You are calm, you have the facts, and you have practiced the sentence. 90 seconds later, you are the one apologizing, and the thing they did has quietly left the room. The mechanism has a name and a shape, and once you know the shape, you can never be caught flat by it again. It goes deny, attack, reverse. First, a flat denial, often with a look of astonishment, as if your point were absurd. Then an attack, not on the facts, but on you, your memory, your motives, your tone, your right to bring it up at all. And then the reversal, where they become the injured party and you become the offender. Picture a courtroom in which the defendant stands up, walks across the floor and sits down in the prosecutor's chair. Nobody announces the swap. The case simply continues, and somehow you are now the one being questioned. The original charge is never dismissed. It is just abandoned, because everyone is busy with the new one. The psychologist Jennifer Freed named this pattern, and the research that followed found two things. The first is grim. It works. When people watch an accusation met with denial, attack, and reversal, they rate the accuser as less believable and blame them more. The second finding is the reason this chapter exists. When people are simply taught what the pattern is and told to watch for it, it largely stops working on them. Educated observers see through it and rate the accused as more responsible, not less. The tactic survives only in the dark. That is also the good news, and it is unusually direct. You have just been inoculated, not by willpower and not by getting better at arguing, but by learning the shape. From now on, when a conversation lurches and you suddenly find yourself on the back foot, a part of you will quietly say, "This is the reversal." And a reversal you can name has already failed, because its entire power was your not noticing the swap. Here is the tool, and it is worth rehearsing out loud, because in the moment your instincts will pull the wrong way. Do not defend yourself against the new charge. That is the trap. Every second you spend proving you are not attacking them is a second the original issue is not being discussed, which was the whole objective. Instead, you do one thing, and you do it as many times as necessary. You return to the fact. It sounds like this. You say, "You told me you would handle this and you did not." They say, "After everything I do for you, this is how you talk to me." You feel the pull to apologize. You do not. You say evenly, "We can talk about my tone later. Right now we are talking about the thing you said you would handle." If they reverse again, you repeat it again in the same calm voice, like a metronome. You are not required to win the argument they just invented. You only have to refuse to leave the one you came in with. And if you want the advanced version, name the move to their face without heat. It sounds like this. "I notice we have moved from what you did to what is wrong with me. I am not going to follow you there. Watch for the shape everywhere because it scales. The partner caught lying who becomes furious about your snooping, the colleague who takes your work and calls you territorial, the public figure who answers evidence with an attack on the accuser and a claim to be the real victim. Same 3 beats every time. There is one genuinely hopeful finding here. When people are simply taught this pattern and told to watch for it, it largely stops working on them. In the research, those who knew the shape rated the accuser as more believable and the accused as more responsible. The tactic survives only in the dark, which means that by listening to this chapter, you have already taken most of its power away. You will recognize the swap by one physical sensation, and it is worth memorizing. You walked into the conversation with a grievance, and at some point your body changed into the posture of someone defending themselves. Your voice got faster. You started producing evidence about yourself. That is the moment, not the words they used, the posture you ended up in. So rehearse the return sentence now in a calm room, because you will not compose one under pressure. Pick something short and neutral you can say twice without heat. We can come back to that. Right now I am asking about the thing you said you would do, then say it again, the same way if you need to. People expect you to either escalate or fold, and a calm repetition is the one response that has no counter. The person who keeps returning to the fact cannot be turned into the defendant. The next one is the hardest in this book because it does not feel like manipulation at all. It feels like love. Chapter 11. The Slot Machine. Here is something cruel about the way you are built. You do not get hooked by people who are good to you. You get hooked by people who are sometimes good to you, and you can never predict when. The mechanism comes from the study of reward. When a reward arrives every single time, the behavior around it is steady and easy to stop. When the reward arrives unpredictably, on no schedule you can work out, the behavior becomes obsessive and extremely hard to extinguish. Psychologists call it a variable schedule. It is the most powerful pattern of reward ever identified, which is why the image is a slot machine, and why it is not a metaphor at all, but the same machinery. A vending machine pays out every time, and nobody has ever ruined their life on one. A slot machine pays out sometimes. The uncertainty is not a flaw in the design. The uncertainty is the product. Now put a person where the machine was. Early on they are extraordinary, attentive, warm, focused entirely on you. That sets the high. Then, once you are attached, the warmth becomes unpredictable. Some days they are the person you first met. Other days they are cold, distant, or simply gone, and you cannot work out which you will get. And something happens that surprises everyone it happens to. You do not walk away. You chase. You work harder to earn back the good version, and each time it briefly returns, the reward lands on exactly the schedule that makes behavior compulsive. There is a chemical reason it grips so hard, and it is not the good moments. The wanting system in your brain fires most strongly not when you receive something, but when you might. It spikes on uncertainty. A reward you can count on produces very little of it, because the brain stops paying attention to sure things. So the very unpredictability that makes a hot and cold person feel exciting is the thing keeping you hooked. You are not addicted to them. You are addicted to the not knowing. In its worst form, when tenderness alternates with cruelty, psychologists call the result a trauma bond, and it explains something that otherwise makes no sense to outsiders. When people ask why someone does not simply leave, this is the answer. They are not weak. They are on a schedule engineered to be almost impossible to quit. The good news is that this string has a simple, reliable test, and it does not require you to interpret anyone's intentions. You do not have to decide whether they mean well. You only have to look at the average, and so here is the tool. Stop measuring the peaks and start measuring the pattern. Take a month, not a night. Ask yourself how you felt across the whole of it most days, not on the best evening. Write down, roughly, how many days felt calm and how many felt like waiting. If the average is anxiety, chasing, and walking carefully around someone's mood, that is your answer, no matter how bright the good days burn. Real care is boringly consistent. It does not need to be earned back on a schedule you cannot predict. And know one more thing, because it will save you at the worst moment. The urge to go back spikes hardest right after the worst stretch, because that is exactly when the machine has trained you to expect a payout. When you feel that pull at its strongest, it is not evidence that you should return. It is evidence of the schedule. You can feel it, name it, and let it pass without obeying it. There is one more cruelty built into the schedule, and it is worth naming because it makes people feel insane. The best moments are real. That is what nobody outside the situation understands. The warmth was not staged. The good week actually happened, and the person you remember is a person who genuinely existed for those few days. This is why advice from friends bounces off. They are arguing with the average, and you are living with the peaks. You are not defending a fantasy. You are defending something you have touched, which is a far harder thing to let go of, and it is why the record from Chapter 1 does more than any argument can. It does not ask you to deny the good weeks. It just puts them next to all the other ones with dates and lets you count. You will see the same schedule far outside romance, wherever someone benefits from you hoping. The manager who praises unpredictably, so you never quite stop performing. The friend who is warm exactly often enough that you keep making the effort. The parent whose approval you could never earn on purpose, only stumble into so you never stop trying. There is one number that settles it, and you can work it out tonight. Over the last 30 days, count the days you felt calm around this person and the days you felt braced. Not the intensity of either, just the count. People consistently get this wrong from memory, because the mind files the peaks and blurs the ordinary Tuesdays, which is precisely how the schedule protects itself. Counting removes the blur, and if the count is uncomfortable to look at, you already have your answer, and you probably had it long before you started counting. Warmth you have to earn back on a schedule is not warmth, it is a payout. The next one is the move every serious manipulator makes first, before any of the others, because without it, almost nothing here works reliably. Chapter 12. The cut wires. If you study the people who do the most damage, the abusers, the cult leaders, the long con artists, you find they all reach for the same move first. They get you alone, not always physically, but they work patiently to reduce the number of people you check reality with. The mechanism is that you do not verify the world by yourself. You verify it against other people. Am I overreacting? Is this normal? Is this a good deal, a good person, a good idea? You have a distributed early warning system made of friends, family, and colleagues, and it works well. So the first job of anyone who wants to run something on you is to take that system offline. Picture an old siege. Before the attack, you cut the telegraph wires, not because the wires are dangerous, but because a town that can call for advice is a town that does not panic, does not surrender, and does not believe whatever the person outside the walls is shouting. Cut the wires first, and everything after is easier. The clearest map of this came from a psychiatrist named Robert Lifton, who studied coercive environments and listed the conditions they share. The first, the foundation the rest are built on, he called milieu control, control of communication and information, sealing people off from outside voices. A cult expert named Stephen Hassan, who was pulled into and then out of such a group himself, later expanded it into what he calls the BITE model, covering control of behavior, information, thought, and emotion. But notice that all four begin the same way. Cut off information. Fill the hours so there is no time for old friends. Teach the person that outsiders are a threat to their happiness. Isolation is not one tactic among four, it is the soil the others grow in. And it almost never arrives as a locked door. It arrives as concern. I just do not think your friends are good for you. Your family has never respected what we have. People out there will not understand us. Let us keep this between the two of us. Every one of those sounds like intimacy and works like a wire cutter, and because it is delivered warmly, you often help hold the scissors. The good news is that this string is the easiest of all to defeat in advance and almost impossible to defeat afterward, which means the entire defense is a decision you make now, calmly, while nothing is happening. You do not have to detect anything in the moment. You just have to refuse, as a standing policy, to be alone with big decisions. So here is the tool, and it has two parts. The first is a standing rule. Keep at least 3 people in your life who are completely outside the influence of anyone who might want something from you. Old friends, family who tell you the truth, someone with nothing to gain. Do not let those relationships thin out, even when you are happy, even when you are busy, especially when someone new is taking up all the room. The second part is a trigger you can act on. Whenever someone asks you to keep something between the two of you, treat that as the signal to tell exactly one trusted person, not the whole world. One. And say the sentence out loud to them, because hearing it in open air does most of the work. It sounds like this. This person does not want me talking to you about this. Watch your friend's face when you say it. That look is information you cannot get any other way. There is a quieter test you can run at any time, and it takes about 10 seconds. Ask yourself who you have spoken to properly in the last month, who has no connection at all to this person or this situation. Not a message, not a like, an actual conversation. If you cannot name 3, the wires are already thinner than you assume. That on its own is not proof of anything sinister. Plenty of lives narrow for perfectly ordinary reasons. A new job, a new baby, a hard year, a move to a different city. But a narrow life is a more vulnerable one, and it is worth knowing which season you are in, because the answer changes what you do next. If the narrowing was ordinary, widen it again for your own sake. If the narrowing was encouraged, if someone has been quietly pleased each time you saw less of someone else, then you have learned something important, and you learned it without having to start an argument. Watch for the 4 sentences that do the cutting, because they are almost always the same ones. Your friends do not really want what is best for you. Your family has never respected this. Nobody else would understand what we have. Let us keep this between us for now. Any one of them, said warmly in an intimate moment, does more damage than an argument ever could. And notice when it happens to your time rather than to your contacts. Nobody has to forbid you from seeing people. They only have to fill every evening, need you constantly, or generate enough small crises that you cancel on your own. Isolation by scheduling looks nothing like control from the inside. It simply looks like a busy season that somehow never ends. Secrecy that is asked for is not intimacy. It is a wire being cut. The next one is quieter than all of these, and it lives closest to home. It does not come from strangers. It comes from people who genuinely love you. Chapter 13, The Debt You Never Signed. Not every string is pulled by someone who wants to harm you. Some are pulled daily by people who love you and have simply learned what works. That is what makes this one so hard to name and so exhausting to live inside. The mechanism is obligation. Not a debt you agreed to, but a debt you are told you already owe. After everything I have done for you, I gave up my whole life for this family. If you really cared about me, you would. Each of these is a bill presented as though you signed it, and the fact that you never did is the one thing everyone in the conversation agrees not to mention. So picture an envelope arriving with a bill inside, and the amount written in someone else's handwriting. There is no contract attached. There is no date, no signature, no record of you ever ordering anything. And yet the bill keeps arriving, month after month, and somehow you keep paying it, because refusing feels less like refusing a charge and more like admitting you are a bad person. The therapist Susan Forward gave this pattern the clearest name I know, and once you have it, you will hear it everywhere. She called the raw materials fear, obligation, and guilt. Fear of the consequences if you refuse. Obligation, the sense that you owe them for the past. And guilt, the feeling that saying no makes you cruel. Notice that not one of those has anything to do with whether the request itself is reasonable. That is the entire point. The request is never argued on its merits, because on its merits it would often lose. Remember Maya, the woman I mentioned at the beginning, 34, who kept a note on her phone titled, "Sorry," with every apology she had made that year, 41 of them by November. Here is the detail from that list that belongs in this chapter. Most of her entries were not apologies for anything she had done. They were apologies for things she had not done, for not calling back quickly enough, for not being able to come, for being tired. She was not apologizing for mistakes. She was making payments on a debt nobody could produce a contract for. The good news is that there is a clean line here, and once you see it, this string loses most of its weight. Caring about someone and complying with someone are two entirely different things. You are allowed to love a person, feel real warmth toward them, be genuinely sorry they are disappointed, and still say no. Those are not in conflict. They only feel in conflict because the person asking has quietly merged them, and because nobody ever told you that you were permitted to hold both at once. Here is the tool, and it is one sentence with two halves. You say the warmth first and the answer second, and you never let the second half apologize for itself. It sounds like this: I love you, and I am not going to do that. I understand you are disappointed, and my answer is still no. I can hear this is hard, and I cannot take it on. Notice the word doing the work. It is and, not but. The moment you say but, you have conceded that the two halves are in competition, and the conversation becomes a negotiation about how much you care, and keeps them separate, and separate is where you are safe. Then hold the line without adding fuel. Do not explain more. Over-explaining is how you invite a debate about your reasons, and your reasons are not the subject. If the pressure continues, repeat the same sentence, slightly shorter, without heat. Most guilt runs out of road when it discovers there is nothing to push against. You will hear the invoice in 4 or 5 standard phrases. After everything I have done for you, I gave up my whole life for this family. If you really cared, I would not have to ask. I never ask you for much. Each one moves the conversation off the request itself and onto your character, which is the only ground where that request could ever win. And there is one trap here that is hardest inside families, so it is worth naming. The person invoking the debt often genuinely did do a great deal for you years ago, and genuinely does feel owed. The past is real. But a real past does not create an open account that anyone can draw on forever, and gratitude is not the same currency as obedience. You are allowed to hold both truths in the same hand. Yes, they did that for me, and I am grateful. And no, I am not doing this. You can be sorry someone is disappointed and still not be responsible for fixing it. 6 chapters remain, and they change direction. The first ones taught you to see what is being done to you. The rest are about what you do with your own mouth, your own time, and your own judgment, starting with the smallest word in the language and the hardest one to say cleanly. Chapter 14, the word no. That most people do not say yes because they were out-argued. They say yes because they could not find a way to say no that did not feel like starting a fight. So they soften it and explain it, and by the end of the explanation they have talked themselves into agreeing. The mechanism is over-explanation. A refusal with reasons attached is not a refusal. It is an opening bid. Because every reason you offer is something the other person can address, and once they have addressed it, your no has quietly become a maybe that you now have to defend all over again. Picture two ways of keeping a door shut. One is a latch. You turn it once, you walk away, and the door stays closed whether you are standing there or not. The other is holding the door with your shoulder. It works for a while, but it takes everything you have, and the moment you tire, the door opens. Most people refuse by leaning on the door. A clean no is a latch. There is a study I like here because it changes something so small. Researchers had people resist temptations using two different phrasings. One group said, "I cannot do that." The other said, "I do not do that." Same refusal, one word different. The people who said "I do not" held out far more often, and the effect showed up again when others were pushing them. The reason is worth remembering. I cannot sounds like a restriction imposed from outside, and restrictions invite negotiation, because maybe today is an exception. I do not sounds like a policy, and policies are not up for discussion. One is a locked door. The other is a door with someone standing behind it, apologizing. Now the good news, which is the opposite of what most people fear. A short no is not rude. A short no is kinder than a long one. The long version, full of reasons and apologies, drags the other person through 5 minutes of hope before landing in the same place. It also, quietly, asks them to approve of your reasons, which is not their job. The people you respect most are almost certainly the ones who can decline quickly and warmly, and you have never once thought less of them for it. So here is the tool, and it is 3 moves. First, keep it to 1 sentence and put the answer in the first half of it. Not a story with a no at the end. "Thanks for thinking of me. I am not going to be able to do that." Second, use the policy form wherever you can. I do not lend money. I do not take work calls after 7. I do not make decisions the same day. A policy is not an insult to the person asking, and it ends the negotiation before it opens. Third, if the pressure keeps coming, repeat yourself instead of escalating. Same sentence, slightly shorter, same calm voice. I understand. Still no. You are not required to produce a new reason each time they push, and the moment you do, you have re-entered the argument you already left. 2 more details that make it work. Do not fill the silence after your no. That silence is uncomfortable, and it is supposed to be, and the person who fills it is the person who concedes. And drop the word but, because but invites a rebuttal. Use and instead. I would love to help and I cannot take this on. Practice on something tiny this week. The extra warranty, the upsell, the optional meeting. Small refusals are where you build the latch, so that it is already installed when something big arrives. There is a study behind that policy phrasing, and it turns on a single word. People resisting temptations were told to say either "I cannot do that" or "I do not do that." The ones who said "I do not" held out far more often and held out better when other people pushed them. The reason is worth keeping. I cannot sounds like a restriction someone imposed on you, and restrictions invite exceptions. I do not sounds like a policy, and policies are not up for debate. Here are 4 scripts you can steal outright. To a request you do not want, "Thanks for thinking of me. I am not going to be able to do that." To an upsell, "No thanks. I do not take the extra cover." To someone close asking for money, "I do not lend money to people I care about. It goes badly for both of us." And to the person still pushing after a clear answer, "I understand, and my answer is the same." Read those again and notice what is missing from all 4. There is no explanation, there is no apology, and there is no opening. Most people cannot hear how much of their own refusal is actually a request for permission to refuse. Take the permission seeking out, and what is left is short, warm, and final. Every reason you give is a handle for someone to pull. Underneath every tool in this book, though, there is one move that makes all of them possible. It is smaller than a sentence. It takes about a second. Chapter 15. The 1-second pause. Every single tactic in this book, without exception, works in the same tiny window. the gap between something happening and you responding to it. Close that gap, and the whole catalogue stops working. Leave it open, and no amount of knowledge will save you. The mechanism is speed. Your mind has a fast track and a slow one. The fast track runs on reflexes and gets there first. The slow track weighs, compares, and asks awkward questions, and it arrives a beat later. Manipulation is simply anything designed to make you act on the fast track before the slow one shows up. Not one tactic in this book survives contact with your slow mind. That is precisely why they are all built to outrun it. Think of a circuit breaker. It does not make the wiring smarter, and it does not stop the current. It simply interrupts the flow for a fraction of a second when a surge comes through, and that fraction of a second is the entire difference between a flicker and a house fire. Your pause does the same job. It does not make you cleverer. It just interrupts the surge long enough for the rest of you to arrive. Here is the good news, and it is the most encouraging thing I can tell you. You do not need 1 minute. You do not need a night most of the time. You need about 1 second, because that is roughly how long it takes for the slower part of you to catch up and start asking useful questions. Everything else in this book is a refinement. If you took only one thing from these 19 chapters and forgot the other 18, the pause would still protect you from most of what is coming, because it is not a defense against any particular tactic. It is a defense against all of them at once. So here is the tool, in 3 parts, and it needs to be trained rather than understood. First, the trigger. You are not pausing before every sentence anyone says to you, which would be exhausting and strange. You are pausing whenever you feel the pull we named in Chapter 1, the tightening, the urge to answer fast, the sense that saying no would make you difficult. That feeling is your cue. When you feel it, the pause begins. And second, the pause itself. 1 slow breath out. That is it. Not a technique, not a meditation. 1 deliberate exhale, which takes about 1.5 seconds and does 2 useful things. It puts a physical gap between the trigger and your answer, and it slightly lowers the arousal that the tactic was counting on. Third, the sentence, because a pause with no words in it gets filled by the other person. You need 1 line that buys time without conceding anything. Let me think about it. I will get back to you today. Give me a moment. Then, and this is the part people skip, you actually stop talking. Let the silence sit there. It will feel like an eternity, and it will last 4 seconds. Install it on small things first. The waiter asking if you want dessert, the colleague asking for a favor in the corridor, the website asking if you want the upgrade. Every low-stakes rehearsal makes the pause slightly more automatic, so that when something genuinely expensive arrives, you do not have to remember it. You have already built it. It helps to know what that second is actually doing. Your mind has a fast track that runs on reflex and always arrives first, and a slower one that weighs and compares and shows up a beat later. Every tactic in this book is built to make you act before the slow one gets there. You are not trying to think harder in that second. You are only trying to still be in the room when the rest of you arrives. Here is where to practice, because you want the repetitions to be cheap. The waiter asking whether you want dessert, the checkout page offering the upgrade, the colleague catching you in the corridor with a favor, the pop-up asking whether to allow notifications. None of these matter, which is exactly why they are perfect. You are not protecting yourself from a dessert. You are laying down a groove, and know what the pause looks like from the outside, because that is what stops most people from ever using it. In your own head, 1 deliberate breath followed by 4 seconds of silence feels enormous, almost rude. To the other person, it simply registers as thoughtfulness. Nobody in the history of conversation has thought less of someone for saying, "Let me think about it." The discomfort sits entirely on your side of the table. It lasts about 1.5 seconds, and it is the cheapest protection you will ever buy. Manipulation lives in the gap before you think. Close the gap and it starves. But there is a wound this book has not touched yet, and it is the one people carry longest. It is what happens after you realize you were played. Chapter 16. Trusting yourself again. The worst part of being manipulated is not the money or the time or even the relationship. It is what happens the morning after, when you realize what was done, and you quietly stop trusting your own read on people. The mechanism is a double injury. The first is the thing itself. The second, and the one that lasts, is shame, the conviction that a smarter person would have seen it, and that your judgment is now unreliable. And shame does something specific and dangerous. It keeps you quiet. It is not an accident that so many people who are conned never tell anyone, which is precisely why con artists keep working the same con for years. Embarrassment is their insurance policy. Picture a compass held near a lump of iron. The needle swings, points confidently in the wrong direction, and refuses to settle. You would not conclude that the compass is broken and throw it in the sea. It was doing exactly what compasses do, in the presence of something it was never designed to detect. Move it away from the iron and it points true again. Your judgment is not broken. It was operating next to someone specifically engineering the field around it. There are two reasons the self-blame is unfair, and both are worth hearing plainly. The first is hindsight. After you know the ending, every clue looks obvious, and your mind rewrites the past so that the signs were always there in bright red. They were not. At the time they were ordinary, ambiguous, and mixed in with 100 other things. The second is the company you are in. Remember that the man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice did not choose fools. His marks were wealthy, experienced businessmen, and on one occasion the most feared gangster in America. Sophistication was not protection for them, and its absence was never your failing. The good news is that this is one of the few injuries where the repair also upgrades you. Every person who has been through this and processed it properly ends up with something they did not have before, which is a specific felt memory of what the pull feels like when it is real. That memory is worth more than any list of tactics. You now have a calibration you could not have bought. So here is the tool, and it has 3 steps. And first, say it out loud to one person you trust, not the whole story to everyone. One person, once. Shame does not survive being spoken, it only survives silence. This step is not optional, and it does more than the other 2 combined. Second, write the timeline plainly on 1 page. What happened in order, with dates if you have them. Then find the earliest moment you felt something and dismissed it. There is almost always one, and it is almost always earlier than you remember. That moment is your tell, not proof you were stupid. Data about what your own early warning feels like. Third, decide how you re-enter, because there are 2 options and only one works. You can re-enter with suspicion, treating everyone as a suspect, which is exhausting, makes you unpleasant to be near, and does not actually protect you. Or you can re-enter with the pause, same openness, same warmth, 1 second of delay. Suspicion costs you every relationship. The pause costs you a breath. And be as kind to yourself about this as you would be to a friend who told you the same story. Not because kindness is nice, but because it works. People who meet their own mistakes with contempt tend to hide them and repeat them. People who meet them plainly tend to learn the lesson once, and know why the self-blame is unfair in one very specific way. Once you know how a story ended, every clue looks obvious, and your mind quietly rewrites the past so that the warnings were always there in bright red. They were not. At the time they were ordinary, ambiguous, and mixed in with 100 other small things that meant nothing at all. You are judging your past self using information she did not have. One more thing about the aftermath, because it catches people who are otherwise doing everything right. You will be tempted either to tell the story to far too many people or to nobody at all. Neither works. Telling nobody seals the shame in where it hardens. Telling everybody turns it into an identity, and you end up carrying it around as the thing that happened to you rather than something you learned and put down. One person once properly, then the page with the timeline, then back to your life. And if you find yourself replaying it at 2 in the morning weeks later, that is not weakness either. That is your mind trying to extract the lesson so it can stop. So write the lesson in 1 sentence, put it where you can see it, and tell yourself the work is done. Usually that is enough. You were not foolish, you were uninformed, and now you are not. There is one last string, and it is the one this whole book has been quietly setting up. It is the one they save for people who have got this far and are now quite sure they are too sharp to be caught. Chapter 17. The Blind Spot. The most dangerous belief you can hold after everything you have just learned is that you are now too aware to be manipulated. That belief is not armor, it is the opening. The mechanism is a quirk in how you see yourself. You can spot bias, pressure, and manipulation in other people with reasonable accuracy. You cannot see the same things in yourself, because from the inside, being manipulated does not feel like being manipulated. It feels like deciding. Picture the blind spot in a car's side mirror. The mirror is not broken. It works beautifully for most of the road. But there is a specific zone, just behind your shoulder, where a whole vehicle can sit completely invisible. And the more confident you are in the mirror, the less likely you are to turn your head. Nobody has ever been hit by a car they were looking at. A psychologist named Emily Pronin studied this directly and called it the bias blind spot. People consistently rate themselves as less biased and less susceptible than the average person, which is arithmetically impossible for most of the people saying it. And here is the finding that should get your attention. Intelligence does not fix it. Researchers studying political reasoning found what they called a sophistication effect, where the most knowledgeable people were the best at arguing away evidence that threatened what they already believed. Their intelligence was not used to find the truth. It was used to defend the conclusion they already wanted. Apply that here and it is uncomfortable. The sharper you are, the better you are at building a reason why the thing you were talked into was actually your own excellent idea. You do not feel manipulated, you feel clever. There is a matching finding about reading people. Most of us are certain we can spot a liar. In the research, people perform barely above chance, and confidence in your ability to detect deception has almost no relationship to your actual accuracy. The people most sure they cannot be fooled are not measurably harder to fool. They have simply stopped checking. Which is exactly why manipulators reach for one specific compliment when they meet someone sharp. I can tell you are not someone who falls for a sales pitch. You see through people, so I am going to be straight with you. You are too smart for me to even try the usual approach. That is not flattery aimed at a fool. It is flattery aimed at the guarded, and it works by convincing them they are the exception, so they set the guard down themselves. The good news is the cleanest sentence in this book. The only real immunity is knowing you do not have one. That is not a defeat, and it is not paranoia. It is simply the difference between a driver who trusts the mirror and one who turns his head. Turning your head takes half a second and costs you nothing, and it is the entire difference. So here is the tool, and it is a practice rather than a mood. Before any decision that matters, especially one you feel completely certain about, say a version of this to yourself. I could be being worked right now, and if I were, this is exactly how it would feel. Obvious, reasonable, entirely my own idea. Then run the checks anyway. Take the pause, ask the outside person. Verify the thing you are sure of precisely because you are sure of it. And treat one thing as the reddest flag you will ever see. Any praise aimed at your intelligence, your judgment, or your immunity to being fooled, arriving from someone who wants something. That compliment has separated more sharp people from their money than any threat ever has. You will meet the specific compliment in the wild, and it always arrives feeling like a relief. I can tell you are not someone who falls for a sales pitch. You clearly do your own research. You are too sharp for me to try anything with you. Honestly, it is a pleasure to talk to someone who actually gets it. Each one lands like respect. Each one is an instruction to stop checking. So build one small habit around it. Whenever somebody praises your judgment while a decision is on the table, treat that exact sentence as a cue to slow down rather than to relax. Not because they are necessarily working you, most of the time they are not, but because the cost of pausing when the compliment was genuine is nothing at all, and the cost of not pausing when it was not is the whole chapter you have just listened to. The person most likely to be caught is the one certain they cannot be. You now have every tool in this book, which leaves one question, and it is the only one that decides whether any of this changes your life or just entertains you for an evening. What are you going to actually do starting tomorrow? Chapter 18, 14 days, but knowing about a string does not cut it. What actually changes is the reflex, and reflexes are built by repetition on small things, not by insight on big ones. So here is a program of 14 days. One action each day, each one small enough that you will actually do it. Before it begins, remember Maya. She is the woman from the start of this book, 34 years old, who kept a note on her phone titled "Sorry," listing every apology she made that year, and who found 41 entries in it by November. She did not fix her life with a confrontation, or a speech, or a dramatic exit. She did it with small things done repeatedly, for about 2 weeks, and then kept doing them. That is the whole method, and it is available to anyone. Day 1, notice only. Do not change anything. Simply catch one moment where you feel the pull, that tightening in the chest or the urge to answer quickly, and write down one line about it in your phone. Where you were, who was there? You are gathering data on your own tell. Day 2, use the sentence once, just once, on something small. Let me think about it. Then stop talking. Notice that the world does not end. Day 3, apply the 24-hour rule to one decision, even a tiny one. Something you were about to buy or agree to today, you agree to tomorrow instead. Watch whether it still looks as good in the morning. Day 4, separate one gift from one ask. Someone does you a small favor and then wants something. Say thank you properly and then answer the request on its own merits, as if their hands had been empty. Day 5, take one request and ask the ladder question. If this were the very first thing this person had ever asked me, would I still say yes? At Day 6, verify one authority independently. A call, an email, a message with a logo on it. Do not use the number they gave you. Look it up yourself and call that instead. Once, just to feel how ordinary it is. Day 7, make one everyone specific. When someone tells you that everyone does this or most people choose that, ask who exactly and whether they are anything like you. Day 8. Catch one compliment that arrives just before a request and notice the timing rather than the words. Day 9. Start a one-line record. Pick the relationship or situation that confuses you most and write one sentence with today's date about what was actually said. Keep doing it. This costs 10 seconds a day, and it is the single best defense against having your memory rewritten. Day 10. Say one clean no, one sentence, the answer in the first half, no reasons attached, and use the policy form if you can. I do not lend money. I do not take work calls after 7. Day 11. Tell one trusted person one thing that someone asked you to keep between the two of you, not a betrayal, a test of the wires. Listen to how it sounds out loud. Day 12. Measure a month rather than a night. Take the relationship that occupies most of your mind and ask honestly how you have felt across the last 30 days on average, not on the best evening. Day 13. Practice the pause 5 times in one day, deliberately, on things that do not matter at all. Dessert, an upsell, a meeting invitation. You are installing a reflex, and reflexes come from volume. Day 14. Read your notes from the first 13 days. Find the earliest moment in each one where you felt something and dismissed it. That recurring feeling is your personal tell, and now you know its name. Then write down the one sentence from this book you will use most often and put it somewhere you will see it. That is the program. Notice what is not in it. There is no confrontation, no ultimatum, no dramatic conversation where you finally tell someone what you think of them. Almost nobody needs that, and it usually makes things worse. What changes your life is 14 small acts of not being rushed. 2 things to expect while you do this, so that neither one stops you. The first is that somewhere around day 4 or 5, someone will push back. Not dramatically, just a slight sharpening when you say you will think about it, or a remark about how you have changed lately. That reaction is not evidence that you are doing it wrong. It is the first evidence that it is working, because a string that stops pulling almost always gets pulled harder before it is let go. The second is that you will miss days. Nearly everyone does, usually around day 6 and again around day 11. Missing a day resets nothing. The only version of this program that fails is the one you abandon because you missed a Tuesday. Pick it up again on Wednesday, at whatever day you were on, and carry on. Reflexes are not built by insight. They are built by repetition on things that do not matter. Which brings us back finally to a note on a phone and to what Maya found when she sat down and read the whole thing. Chapter 19, the list. In December, Maya sat down and read the whole note. 41 apologies. She had expected to feel embarrassed, and she did for about a minute. Then she started counting, and the embarrassment turned into something colder and more useful. 31 of the 41 were to the same person. That was the whole revelation. Not a betrayal, not a dramatic discovery, nothing you could put in a film. Just a number. 31 out of 41, to one person over 11 months. And here is the thing she said afterward that I have never forgotten. She said she had known for a long time that something was wrong, but she had never been able to hold it still long enough to look at it. Every individual apology had a reason. Every single one on its own made sense. It was only when they sat in a list with dates that the shape appeared. That is what a record does. It is not evidence for an argument. It is a way of seeing a pattern that is invisible while you are inside it, one reasonable moment at a time. What she did next is the part that surprises people. Nothing dramatic. There was no confrontation, no speech, no final conversation where she said everything she had been holding. She simply started using two of the tools in this book. She began saying, "Let me think about it," and then not talking. And she began saying no in one sentence, without a paragraph of reasons attached to it. The other person noticed within a week there was a period of pressure, which is normal and which you should expect, because when a string stops pulling, the first response is almost always to pull harder. She held, not angrily. She just kept using the same calm sentences. By March, the note had 4 entries. She kept the old one. She told me she has never deleted it, and not out of resentment. She keeps it because it is a calibration. It is the record of exactly what the pull felt like, in her own words, on 41 specific days, and no book could ever have taught her that as precisely as her own list did, which is what I would leave you with. You do not have to become suspicious, or hard, or cold. Those are not the goal, and they are not even useful. Most people around you are not pulling anything. Most kindness is just kindness. What changes is that you can now tell the difference, and that is what makes it safe to keep being open. Clarity is what allows you to stay warm. If you want one place to start tonight, make it the record. Not a journal, not a project, nothing that requires discipline to maintain. One line, with today's date, about one thing that was said to you today that did not sit right. It will feel pointless for the first week, and it should, because a single line is not a pattern. Somewhere around the 3rd week, the entries usually stop being separate incidents and start pointing in the same direction. That is the moment people describe to me most often, and it is rarely shock and rarely anger. It is closer to relief because they have finally stopped guessing about a situation they had been guessing about for a very long time. The list is not evidence, and it is not for anybody else to read. It is simply the only reliable way I know to see the shape of a thing from inside it. And notice what Maya did not need in order to change any of it. She did not need to become a harder person. She did not need to cut anyone out, or win an argument, or deliver the speech she had been rehearsing in the shower for a year. She needed a record so that she could finally see the shape. And she needed 2 sentences used consistently, in ordinary moments, for about a fortnight. That is the whole method of this book, and it is deliberately unglamorous. 19 strings, 1 feeling in your body, 1 second of pause, and a small number of plain sentences you are allowed to repeat as often as you need to. There is nothing here you have to be clever to use, which is fortunate, because as Chapter 17 showed, clever was never the thing that protected anybody. One honest note before we finish. This book is about the ordinary manipulations that fill ordinary life. If you are in a situation that frightens you, where someone is controlling your movements, your money, or your safety, that is a different thing, and it deserves more than a set of sentences from an audiobook. Talk to a professional, or to someone whose job it is to help with exactly that. There is no cleverness required. Just tell one person, and if you take nothing else from these 19 chapters, take the smallest one. 1 breath. Then let me think about it. That single second used consistently would have prevented most of what has ever been done to me, and I suspect most of what has ever been done to you. You will feel the line go tight before you ever see the hook. Now you know what to do in the second that follows. If this was useful, subscribe. Full audiobooks go up every Thursday and Sunday, and it is the only way these reach the next person who needs them. And tell me one thing in the comments because I read them. Which string did you recognize first? One word is enough.